of Asset Management Services with DAS. I wanted to show my face here just for a second for those folks who don't know who I am. Michelle Williams and I, there she is. We will be conducting the webinar this morning, and we'll have different roles. So it'll be me pretty much talking through the scenarios and the different policies. Michelle will be behind the scenes working with you as far as your questions. So there, you don't get to see my ugly mug anymore, thank goodness. So one of the things that we want to make sure is just kind of do some ground rules as far as the webinar goes. We are going to record the webinar, so we want to make sure everybody understands that. And we will post the webinar onto the asset management website. We'll go through the website in a few seconds here. Right now, last year's webinar is on our website. There have been some of your coworkers who've had conflicts who could not attend this morning, and we have kept a list of those folks, and we will shoot them an email once our IT people have been able to post the recording to our website. So like I said earlier, if you have a question, you will be able to ask it in the chat, and then Michelle will monitor the chat and she will read the questions off to me. I think it's important, even with a large group of people today, it's important that if you have a question that you don't wait until the end. And I've said this for years, whether we did the in-person webinars like we used to, or these Teams webinars. It's important that you don't not ask the question. If you wait till the end, you might forget, or you might think it's just not important. If something comes up in your head and you think it's a policy related question, please ask it. One thing I would ask of you is we won't be able to answer questions that are specific to your agency's processes, but if it is a question about the policy and how all agencies are supposed to handle something, then definitely ask the question. Okay, so yeah, everybody, has their microphones muted and the cameras are off. You don't need your camera on today. So let's go ahead and get started. So right there on the first page, I'm going to go and click on the link here and go to the Asset Management Services website. Okay, this is our website. And the important pieces to know about our site, you have the certification information, you have the Ohio Revised Code, which we will briefly discuss here in a second. This picture here is the policy webinar that's from 2022. And then the key parts of the front page of our website are right in front here. The Asset Management Handbook is the state policy. It's the state inventory policy. Today's document, once you've attended, the state document will be emailed to you. But again, the document we're using for the webinar should not replace the Asset Management Handbook. Today's document is a subset of that, but it does not replace it. We don't have everything in there. Our policy is over 70 pages. Also on this screen here, these are all the location codes for Oaks AM. If there are some agencies on the call that are still using their own in-house inventory system, but these are the valid location codes for to be used in Oaks AM, and also the valid profile IDs are listed here. We also have a couple of forms, the interagency transfer form and the Oaks AM location code form. The interagency transfer form is if you are transferring from an agency to another agency. It's not a department transfer. It's not if DRC is sending something from Richland County to Mansfield. That's still within your own agency, so that form doesn't need to be used. This form is only used when you're sending equipment to another agency. The location code form here is if you have changes to locations, whether it's a description, maybe the building has changed names, or if you have new location codes that need to be added to Oaks, you would fill out those forms and send it in to us. And then this here on the bottom is the AM policies and procedures, and it basically is just a policy that gives us the right to do what we do. So that's our website. Okay. Now I'm going to get into the actual Ohio Revised Code. I'm going to read part of this exactly because this is exactly what is in the Ohio law. Okay, and it says, in accordance with procedures prescribed by the Director of Administrative Services, the office in charge of each state agency, other than institutions of higher education, shall maintain current and accurate records of tangible personal property and real property as defined by the Department of Administrative Services, and that state agency holds directly or on behalf of the state. These records shall specify value of property, number of acres of land, the kind of buildings, and other significant information about the property. Okay, so basically that first part gives DAS the right to prescribe how agencies record their assets. And then in turn, DAS gives that responsibility to Asset Management Services, which is Michelle and I. The second part of that, on or before the first day of October, immediately following the end of each fiscal year, the officer in charge of each state agency shall cause its inventory activity at the end of the fiscal year to be certified as correct. Okay. And then I won't go through the rest of that. But basically each agency has to certify their inventory as of June 30, and they have all the way up until October 1st to do that certification. Okay. We will talk a little more about certification as we go through here. Okay. Now on page 2, these are basically the cost thresholds for what's required to be inventoried based off of what type of item it is, and also the cost. So you see here with personal property, that's also equipment, same type of vernacular. Anything that's greater than 1,000 must be recorded in an asset system. Okay. When you get to intangible property, such as computer software, that goes all the way up to 100,000. Okay. Then you have firearms, which firearms are required to be inventoried regardless of the cost. Okay. Sensitive items, 500 or more, have to be recorded in the inventory system. And here's an example of some of the type of categories that would be considered sensitive: audiovisual equipment, communication equipment, antiques, works of art, surveillance equipment, power tools. Now, number 5 there is highlighted in blue, and basically anything that computes is considered required to be inventoried regardless of the cost. Okay, so computers, laptops, Blackberries. A couple agencies still have Blackberries. Most agencies have smartphones now. All of those need to be recorded as an asset and be tracked regardless of the cost. There are a handful of agencies that have real property. And so for land, Land is regardless of the acquisition cost. Same with easements. You have easements to external land, and then you have easements to state-owned land, and both of those are also regardless of the cost. Number 4 down here with land improvements. Land improvements that are greater than 15,000 must be inventoried. Okay, and some examples of that are parking lots, sidewalks, retaining walls, yard lighting, fencing, other structures are considered land improvements. But anything greater than 15,000 must be recorded. Number 5 there, we talk about buildings and renovations to buildings. Renovations to buildings that are greater than 100,000 must be recorded as an asset in the inventory system. Now, we just went over the requirements of what needs to be inventoried at a certain dollar threshold. Now, we're going to go through what's considered a capital asset, because for the folks that use Oaks, you know that if something hits the capital threshold, it has to be recorded, differently than a non-capital asset. So for an example, you would have a C on the end of your profile ID. Okay. Capital assets, identifying them and recording them are extremely important, because at the end of the year, we report all the state's capital assets to OBM. And then OBM puts them in there in the state's financial report by the end of the calendar year. So it's important that we understand what's a capital asset versus what's just a stewardship asset. So, and one of the questions we get a lot there, which is highlighted in blue, is sometimes people use capital funds to buy equipment. Okay. Capital funds being used doesn't mean that the asset is a capital asset. Okay. So if you buy a desk, okay, with capital funds, and that desk is less than $1,000, okay, that's not a capital asset. Capital asset, as we'll see here shortly, for equipment, a capital asset, the threshold is 15,000. Okay, so just remember that if you're entering something with a capital fund, that doesn't mean it's going to be a capital asset. It's a capital asset in Oaks AM or in an in-house inventory system. It's a capital asset if it meets the dollar threshold for what we're doing. Okay, so here we go. So we're going through here. Now, before we said, hey, any personal property that's $1,000 needs to be inventoried. But if that property is greater than 15,000, then you need to record it as a capital asset. Okay. And the same rule applies for the intangible personal property, such as software. Okay. If it's greater than 100,000, it needs to be recorded, and it will be recorded as a capital asset. Again, land is always capital. Easements are always capital. Land improvements that are greater than 15,000 are considered capital. Buildings. This is always a little crazy. Buildings that are greater than 15,000, and everybody's saying, well, what in the world are you saying here? 15,000. Every building is over 15,000. There are a few agencies that have sheds that have a foundation that's attached to a slab, and those meet the definition of a building, and they are not quite 15,000. So we do have 15,000 as the threshold for a capital asset. Again, the same thing, 100,000 is for a building renovation. Any renovation over 100,000 needs to be recorded as a capital asset. Licensed vehicles that are greater than 15,000, and all of these, all of the vehicles these days are greater than 15,000. Again, licensed vehicles are not required to go in Oaks AM. Okay, they are required to go into Fleet, Ohio. But you still have the capital asset. If you, hold on, I said that incorrectly. Let me start over with licensed vehicles. If you own the vehicle, it does go in Oaks. If you lease the vehicle, it goes into Fleet, Ohio. And most of the vehicles that we see are now being leased. Okay, so there are very few vehicles, licensed vehicles in Oaks. But the threshold for capital asset is still 15,000. Number 8 here with infrastructure, there are only 2 agencies required to inventory.
Fred.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question from Gabrielle. She says, so if you put in the amount that the item ended up costing, it doesn't automatically get labeled as a capital asset?
No, it
You
does
should,
not. Yeah.
okay,
Oh, I'm
you
sorry.
should
I'm
have to
sorry.
make sure, you have to make sure it's listed as a capital asset.
Yes. So the system will not automatically tell you what profile ID to use based off the cost. Okay. So yes, it's up to the person entering the asset to know the rules on what's a capital asset and what's not a capital. An example off the top of my head would be a server. Okay, now I know a server, the profile ID is 3874. Okay, that's the profile ID that Oaks has for a server. If that server is greater than 15,000, then the profile ID should be 3874C. Okay, if that server is only 14,000, then the profile ID would be 3874 without a C. But yes, the person doing the entry needs to know these rules as far as what's capital and what's not capital. That's a good question. Okay,
Emily
so back.
has a question as well.
Okay.
She says, should buildings less than 15,000 be entered into Oaks as a non-capital asset?
That depends on your agency. That is also a good question. These thresholds for capital and also for just, requirements in general. Let's go back to just not just the buildings, but just let's say equipment. Okay, you buy a piece of equipment and it's not sensitive and it's less than $1,000. By the state rule, you do not have to record that asset. You do not have to tag that asset. Okay. However, there are agencies that choose to track items at a lower threshold. Okay, they could go down to 500, 300, whatever they want to do. You can put an asset in. You can put a calculator that costs 85 cents or whatever. You can put that into Oaks. I would suggest doing that because it's a nightmare tracking it when you do your physical inventory. But agencies have the right to lower their threshold. Okay, so that goes for capital assets as well. So we said earlier, renovations, the requirement is $100,000. But in the past, there have been some agencies that had $75,000 worth of work on a roof, and they decided, you know what, we're putting this in as a renovation record. And again, they have the right to do that. In that case, they would not use a capital profile ID because it's less than 100,000. They would use like 9600 or something instead of 9600C. Good questions, Michelle.
I have another question.
All righty.
Ashley has a question. She says, if I have an IT component that by myself is priced at $1,500, but is plugged into a larger module, do we tag and inventory both items or just the larger module?
Okay, so I guess I have to ask another question back to Ashley is, does the second item that's plugged in, can it function on its own? And the answer, so if that item can function on its own, then it's a separate asset. But if it doesn't work without plugging it into the bigger one, then that's considered one asset. And then what you can do is, well, it's not really considered one asset. It's still two assets. Okay. But what you do is you link it with a parent-child relationship so that you have the bigger asset. It has its own asset tag. And the second asset, the smaller asset that you're using with the big one, that also has a tag number, and it is linked together by doing a parent-child relationship. Okay.
He said that helps. Thanks, Fred.
Well, Ashley shouldn't be asking any questions, but haha, I'm joking. All right, so here we go. We're into infrastructure, and basically both infrastructure records for DNR and for ODOT. The infrastructure records are regardless of the cost. Okay.
Hey, Fred. Matthew Baldwin, he says, can you cover the licensed vehicles to be added into Oaks? All of our own vehicles are in Fleet, Ohio. Fred?
Well, and they should be. They should be. They should be. Right. The only records, and you know what, I'm sorry, but I believe that I said the wrong thing earlier. So I'm glad, Matthew, that you asked this question. The only records, vehicle records, that should be in Oaks, the first one are non-licensed vehicles. Okay. So like think of a Gator, something like that, it's a vehicle, but it doesn't, it's not a licensed over-the-road vehicle. Those type of non-licensed vehicles do go in Oaks if they meet the threshold. The other type of item that goes into Oaks are leased vehicles. Now, leased vehicles can be, if an agency is leasing directly from a company, then that agency would enter the leases in Oaks. And actually, we have a new process so that moving forward, the agencies do not enter leases at all. You end up communicating that information to Michelle and I, and we add all the leases for you. Okay. But there won't be that many in that case where an agency is leasing directly from a company. Most of the time, the agencies are leasing from DAS, and then DAS is leasing from the company. So then it's DAS's responsibility to work with Michelle and I to get those leased records added into Oaks. So Matthew, you are correct in wondering, if you own a vehicle, it does not go in Oaks AM. Owned vehicles and leased vehicles, all the vehicles go into Fleet, Ohio. Okay. Every vehicle information goes into Fleet, Ohio. And again, the only two that are that go into Oaks are non-licensed vehicles and leased vehicles. So very good question.
I have another question from Emily.
Okay.
DNR owned licensed vehicles / trailers are in Fleet, Ohio. The only trailers not in Fleet, Ohio are either loaned out to local entities for marine patrol or tiny trailers that do not go on public roads.
Okay, so they're non-licensed trailers.
He says owned licensed vehicles, trailers are in Fleet, Ohio. The only trailers not in Fleet, Ohio are either loaned out to local entities or marine patrol or tiny trailers that do not go on public roads.
Okay, so I would definitely reach out to the
She
folks
says,
at
yes, they're non-licensed. I'm sorry.
Fleet, Ohio, I don't know if they want non-licensed trailers. Okay. But trailers are equipment, and trailers should be in Oaks if they're non-licensed. It also depends on if they meet the cost threshold, which I would assume trailers can be, thousands of dollars. But non-licensed, the trailer should be an equipment record. It should be a record in Oaks.
Okay, she says non-licensed are in Oaks AM.
Okay, good. That's good.
I have another question from Thomas.
Mhm.
Has there been any consideration to raising the asset threshold amount from 1,000 to a larger amount based on inflation and the increasing cost of goods?
There have been, and that was squashed by folks higher than me. 5,000 was sounding pretty good, and that got denied. So they still want us tracking stuff at $1,000.
That's it for
So
now.
yeah, that was definitely considered. That was just a few years ago. Okay, what we're going through now is the annual activity, that the certification that I had mentioned. And I need to make sure that everyone understands who's participating today. Agencies do certifications by the agency, not by the department or the division. So most of you on the call will never do a certification. Okay. You may have to report something to someone at your agency, like DNR might have to report information to Patina, or DRC may have to report information to Phil Murray. But there's only one certification per agency. It's usually somebody at central office or in your business office or central support or whatever you call it. But this is an example of the annual certification form that needs to be submitted each year. And then basically it's an online spreadsheet that shows the beginning balance, which is basically last year's ending balance, and then any additions, transfers, retirements, adjustments, reinstatements, and transfers in, transfers out. That is, what we're looking at now is the form we call Schedule A, and then Schedule B is basically for any inventory that didn't get recorded in time. That needs to go on Schedule B, because you're basically certifying you have these assets even though it didn't get entered into the asset system before it was shut down for the end of the fiscal year. Here is the every other year biennials physical certification. And basically this is a one-page sheet.
We have another question, Fred.
Okay, go ahead.
Gary says, why isn't this spreadsheet automated, auto-refilled or auto-filled? Schedule A.
It's a good question. That question started back in 2004, and I don't have a great answer, except that the powers to be thought that it was too pricey to do something like that, because we would have to pay a lot of money to have programming experts auto-populate our reports with this form. Okay, so that's why it's not done. The physical inventory form shown on this page, this is a very quick and brief snapshot that basically says, hey, the last time I took a physical inventory was, it has a date, it has executive officer and a title, and it's very quick and dirty, easy to fill out. And the requirements for physical inventory are a biennium. Okay, so It turns out every odd fiscal year, agencies have to submit their physical inventory. So we just finished last year was fiscal year 23. And so agencies would have had to do a physical inventory in either fiscal year 22 or fiscal year 23 to be in compliance with the law. Okay. If you take a physical inventory within a 2-year period, you are okay and you meet and you comply with the Ohio Revised Code. There are agencies, and I would say a good chunk of agencies, that do a physical count every year because they're trying to make sure that they crack down on their shrinkage and missing items. But some agencies, the larger agencies, may not be able to do that, but they at least have to do a physical count within that 2-year period.
I have a question for Marcia.
Okay.
Are there any specific requirement to have physical inventory done, or what documents we should keep to show proof of completion of audited, if audited?
Okay. So there are no external reports. There are no physical inventory forms that agencies use. Agencies can use whatever they want. The proof, there really is no proof that anybody ever took a physical inventory, to be honest with you. People can say they took a physical count. It's not till somebody else does a physical count and finds items are missing. But the proof as far as compliance with you recording the physical inventory is this right here. If someone submits that they took their last physical inventory within that 2-year period, that form is submitted and it's on our website. It's in our application. And we have had auditors reach out to us to prove that that an agency certified. You can certify, but there's no documents that you should keep that shows that you took a physical count. I think that's what you were asking. I hope I answered your question. Okay, page 11 here. And this is pretty important because there's always situations where assets can't be found during a physical count. I want to read the highlighted word for word here. Upon a state employee recognizing that one or more assets cannot be found, the agency shall pursue an investigative review to find that asset. An investigative review may consist of a special review of documents, interviews with personnel, and/or special inventory. During this time, the asset may remain active on the agency's inventory. Okay, so that right there says if you don't find something doing a physical inventory, you need to try again. Okay, and trying again may involve talking to people in those areas, the folks who have worked there, just to find out if maybe they have an idea where it went, so that maybe you can find it. Okay, and while that's happening, you don't need to retire the asset as missing. You would retire the asset as missing if after your secondary review, nobody knows where it went, there's no logical explanation, then you would have to record it as missing. The other thing you can do is sometimes when you do another physical inventory, the item shows up. And if that's the case, then that's where we get to the second part down here. If a missing asset is found during a physical inventory, the record and the record has been retired in OCM or an agency inventory management system, the agency shall immediately reactivate the record, the inventory record. So you reactivate it, make it active again if you find something that you've coded as missing. There are times here with retiring assets using the disposal code does not meet threshold. There are occasions when agencies decide, hey, you know what, we're not going to track assets at $300 anymore or $500 anymore. And we're changing our thresholds. We're going to go to the state threshold of 1,000. Okay. If something like that happens, then you can dispose of all those small dollar amount items with a disposal code that does not meet the threshold. Okay. Excuse me. Here we have, and again, this is Oaks specific. This is not for agencies that don't use Oaks. But here are the codes you would use based off of getting rid of cell phones. So if you deal with Tango, those are going to be disposed as scrapped, because we've been told by Surplus that Tango actually melts down the cell phones. Okay. Whereas if you use the RP asset recovery, they wipe the phones and they actually will ship them out to Surplus, and Surplus sells them on the online auction. So then you would record those as retire by sale. Just depends on how you get rid of your assets. So this next section is specific to employee wrongdoing and suspected illegal activity. I'm not going to go through this word for word, but basically, if someone believes something is going on illegal, and it may be a coworker or another, just an employee of someone at your agency, you need to deal with the highway patrol and also probably your legal counsel of your agency. You basically need to let someone know. Okay, and there's all kinds of information here, but the gist of it is that you need to contact someone and get the ball rolling to see if there is something wrong, or if maybe it just appeared to be wrong, but you have that responsibility that if you see something, you're supposed to act on it, and at least pass it to your supervisor. Yes.
Denny Blackwell said, what if your agency wipes phones?
If they do it on their own, then what's the, I guess if they then send them out to Surplus, it's retire by sale. If Surplus tells them, no, we don't want them, then I guess then that would be whatever they end up doing, whatever Danny ends up doing with the cell phones. But I believe Surplus wants those cell phones. So even if they're wiped out, but they still sell them in bulk at the. But yeah, if an agency does their own wiping of the equipment, then the question becomes, what happens to the equipment after you wipe it out? Is it scrapped? Is it melted? Or is it sent to Surplus? On the page there highlighted, this is a policy that's been around for it's close to 8 years now. Whenever a police report is filled out, if something was stolen, the initial police report must be electronically saved and attached to the asset record in Oaks AM or an agency in-house inventory system. And that can be done on the basic ad page. I believe it can also be done on the retirement page. But the initial police report must be attached to the record for anything that is stolen. OBM a few years back provided some information on what they look for when they're doing an audit. Again, this is not the auditor of state. This is OBM. But I have been told by several agencies that OBM does extensive audits. I think one agency kind of described the audit as a painful audit, and they had been working for the state for 25 years and never had this, but anyway, these are some of the things that they look for. Okay. And you can go through this at your leisure when we send this over to you after the webinar. But basically they're looking, and I think it's a lot of it is the same as it's been for 20 years, where they take a handful of assets that are on your report and they say, okay, these are active, show me where they are. If you've gotten rid of them since the report, then you can show them that they're retired. And I think the issue comes about if you can't locate the asset, or they look at custodians. Okay, if Fred has the item but the custodian is Michelle, you'd probably get dinged on that. But these are the items that they look for. We talked about this earlier with voluntarily tracking items under the cost threshold, right? So you can track items that are less than whatever the threshold is, but you must use a non-capital profile ID. Tagging assets and ordering tags. So one of the things that we do not do is we do not promote a specific company to buy your barcode tags from. Okay, and we know barcode tags are purchased in rolls, and there could be rolls of 500, rolls of 1,000, whatever. And so there's a lot of time in between ordering new tags. Okay, state printing could help folks with reordering barcode tags. We have in the past, state printing has given us a company name that we can refer folks to. But again, you can do anything that you can purchase tags on your own as long as you go through the proper procurement procedures. And one of the things here that I'm highlighting is you do have to have your barcode tags. They must have your agency and or your division or institution printed on the tags so that they are specific to you. And that is important, especially when you, if you could transfer the item to another agency. We can't have the same barcode tags one agency has and the other agency has the same barcode tags, because then when you go to transfer the item will reject. They need to be specific to your agency or your division or institution, so you can identify those. Okay, the policy requirement on asset record entry. Okay, upon receipt of an item, there is no time requirement stating when you must record the asset in the asset management system. Okay, there is. Yes,
question. From Marcia. She said, if you retire assets that don't meet current threshold, do you need to try to remove tags since it won't be in Oaks inventory anymore?
Absolutely, yes. If you have something that has a barcode tag on it, then that tag, that should be recorded in Oaks. And yes, if you decide you're going to retire assets, you need to pull those tags off. If you can't pull the tag off because it's just too hard to do, you need to take a black permanent marker and mark through that tag number, so that when you get audited, that's not fair game. Okay. And then you can show them that you retired the record because it was a low dollar amount item to begin with and never needed to be recorded, and that your agency changed your internal policy and therefore it's not required to be inventoried.
Have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Have another one. Can Excuse me, wait a minute. Sorry, I had to cough. Another question says, can items be added into the Oaks inventory that don't have a barcode tag?
No, no.
She also said, you mentioned that some agencies pull smaller items in, so wasn't sure if those ended up having barcode tags.
Yeah, you cannot record an asset in an inventory system unless it has a barcode tag. There are property state of Ohio labels. Okay, those are stickers. You can put those, some agencies will put those on like old cabinets or file cabinets or whatever, and it'll say property state of Ohio and it'll have your agency on it, but there's no barcode, there's no numbers. Okay, those can be stickered and never put into Oaks if an agency feels that for some reason that equipment would walk away or be taken or stolen. But no, barcode tags, if something has a barcode tag on it, then it has to be in the inventory system. And if it's then retired, that asset is shipped away, scrapped, sent to surplus, and the item needs to, the tag needs to be removed or at least marked out so nobody can read it. Okay, back up to the top of the page here in the blue. There is no time requirement stating that an asset record must be put in an asset system by a certain amount of time. However, you should try to enter a record as soon as possible. There is a policy that states you need to tag the item within 15 days of receipt, but there's no policy on how long you have to enter the record. The suggestion is that you do it as soon as you can, and definitely don't wait till the end of the fiscal year, because that's when items get lost or things don't get recorded properly, and then they're already disseminated to a person to use that equipment, and it's never entered into Oaks, and then you get dinged on an audit for that as well. Any interagency transfers, I'll probably mention this more than once, but state surplus has to approve any transfers that are going from an agency to another agency. Also, state surplus has donation rules, okay? And you must get approval from state surplus before you donate something. I know some of the rules, for example, like you can't donate to your own church. That's a thing. But you do with any transfers, even if, agency A has already talked to agency B and everybody's in agreement that these assets need to be transferred to agency B. Yes, agency A still has to go through state surplus and get approval. And then you can send us the transfer authorization form. And then Michelle, one of us, will actually do the transfer in Oaks, because we have access to all business units of Oaks, all the agency's inventory, and you guys don't have access to transfer to another agency. Also, speaking of access, security access to Oaks AM. A lot of people will reach out to us and say, hey, I need to get access to Oaks. We don't have any authority. We cannot grant someone access to Oaks to use. There should be at least one person, if not more, at your own agency. We call them a security designee, but they can go right into Oaks and set up the profile for a brand new employee, and then that's how you would get access to Oaks. And when that's happening, you also need to have an approver assigned to you. So if you retire something, lost, missing, lost or stolen or casually lost, any of those three ways in Oaks AM, they have to be approved by your supervisor. So you would need someone to be your approver as well. Here's one of the things that happens occasionally with folks still working at home. There is an employee residence location code, that one there that starts with an A and with all eights. That is a valid active location code
Bill,
for folks
Fred,
who work from home. Yes.
I have a question from Kay. Kay wants to know, how do you find out who your agency designee is?
Okay. I would say that it's somebody in your fiscal area. It may be Jennifer. But it's somebody in the business office or fiscal area that it's either them or at least they know who it is. And that's across the board at most agencies that I've been working with. The example of working from home, I will tell you, Michelle and I are still working from home most of the time. We have the option of having our location code be the one on your screen here, or you can have it still be your main office when you're in there once a week or whatever. Okay, so you have the option, and either one of those location codes would be correct. So an example right there with our main office is Surface Road, 4200 Surface Road. Okay, so we have the option of using AAXP0001. And I believe that's the one that we do have on our assets. Okay. Donations to state agencies. This comes about every once in a while, so I thought we should probably continue talking about this. An asset donated to the state is treated the same as a state-owned asset by the state of Ohio. Donation is defined as an asset bestowed to the state of Ohio without compensation, where the donor relinquishes all rights to the gifted asset to the state. Upon acceptance and receipt of the donated asset, it is considered property of state of Ohio. As such, the asset is subject to the Ohio statute, rules, policies that govern all state-owned assets. A transmittal letter shall accompany the donated asset, either completed by the donor or the state of Ohio. Okay, so if your agency receives some donation, something, okay, some kind of equipment, there needs to be a transmittal letter done. The letter can be done by the person who donates, or it can be done by the agency that's receiving, but there should be a letter in there that basically says that the donor is relinquishing all responsibility of that asset and that it becomes property of the state of Ohio. Okay. Donations to outside entities. Okay, any equipment being donated to the state of Ohio, you got to go through state surplus to get approval. Okay, and I mentioned that earlier. You get approval from state surplus, allowing you to donate to an outside entity. An example would be Ohio State. Okay, there are some agencies that have equipment that they want to send that to Ohio State University. And even though Ohio State is Ohio, they're not a state agency. Okay, remember at the beginning when I went through the Ohio Revised Code, there was a section in there that said other than institutions of higher learning. Okay, so Ohio State is not part of the state policy. Okay, and they're considered an outside entity. So if an agency wants to transfer or donate items to Ohio State, you still have to go through state surplus to get approved. And then if you're working in Oaks, if you're an Oaks AM user, you record that asset even though you're transferring it to Ohio State, you would record it as a retirement. And we have a disposal code donated to external group. That's how that would be handled. When you're adding, this comes about during a physical inventory, if you're adding assets when you don't know what the cost is, okay, the best thing you can do is there's no paperwork. You have no idea how much this item costs. If you run an assets on hand report, that could help, because you could sort the tag number by the tag number field, and you may still have other items of a similar cost and funding and acquisition date. Okay, if that doesn't work, the items have to be tagged, and there's no way of knowing, the funding, acquisition, or the cost. You really have to do your best estimate to go online and do a search for that asset to try to find the fair market value. Okay. You should never put a record in as a dollar or a penny unless that's exactly what you paid for it. And we've had that come up recently where cell phone, the second round of cell phones, you buy them from Moby, or you buy them from a reseller and they give you a great deal and they're $99 or 99 cents. If it's the true value that you paid for it, that's what you put in. But you cannot make up a value of a penny or a dollar just to get the record in the system. You have to do a fair market value to get those assets in. And then the question of, well, what do I use for the fund? We suggest that you use the fund that's predominantly what you use for that type of item. Okay. The acquisition date is going to be a guess. You're going to guess based off of how old it is, based off of other items that you have in your inventory. And then we suggest that if you enter it into Oaks with an estimated cost, an estimated acquisition date, that you go to the basic ad page and you can create a comment and briefly explain how you arrived at those estimates. Okay, that helps during an audit. It basically covers yourself as, hey, I didn't know how to go about this, but I needed to get it in the system as a fair market value asset. Installation and shipping costs. We've had some questions this year about this. Installation fees and shipping costs should be included in the original cost of an asset. And we've had, certain cases where they're not included in the original asset record, that you've added it to Oaks, and later you find out that there were shipping and installation costs. So you can go and go on a cost adjust transfer page and enter the new cost, including the installation or the shipping. Okay. And this is kind of important, if the asset did not meet the cost threshold originally, and now when you add installation and shipping costs, it does meet the cost threshold, then that asset has to be tagged and recorded in the asset system at the proper value. Now, this last paragraph here, if you have an item and in the future there are maintenance fees associated with the asset, the maintenance fees would not be included in the cost of the asset. Okay, maintenance fees are not considered, they're considered a service, they're not considered a tangible asset. But that's ongoing maintenance fees.
I have a question, Fred.
Yes.
Matthew said, so if there is one shipping charge for 15 items, should distribute the shipping cost 15 times?
Yes, it gets divided equally amongst however many items you have. Absolutely. there was a question about infrastructure records, and the example was a portable building that does not have a foundation. Okay, and that would be considered a land improvement, not an infrastructure record. We've also had questions about leasehold improvements, and that's basically when the state agency is leasing office space and they decide they want to make improvements to the space, and the tenant or the owner of the building allows the changes to be made. Those improvements should be considered an asset. Okay, and that improvement would actually be a record in Oaks AM, and we have a profile ID for that. Any leasehold improvements, I would doubt there's a lot of leasehold improvements going on these days, but it's still a possibility. We've also had a question, a custodian question. So there are some small boards and commissions, small agencies. Sometimes they will buy, let's say, laptops, and they'll use another agency to image the laptops. And if that's the case, then the agency should change the location code to wherever the laptops are being imaged at the new agency. But you don't need to change the custodian. You can leave the custodian. It can remain the asset manager of the purchasing agency.
Another question, Fred.
Mm-hmm.
What cost threshold for a leasehold improvement should be recorded in Oaks as asset?
Great question. And let me see if I can look. I don't have that at the top of my head. I believe it's 100,000. Michelle, remind me at the end here, and I'll pull up our policy and actually look for it. Okay, because
I believe it's 100,000, Fred. I thought it was up there.
Well, if you have time to look for it, please do. I don't want to stop this right now and go, but I will answer it before the end of the meeting here. But I do believe it's 100,000 is leasehold improvements. I believe it's the same as renovations.
And she also said, if that's the case, I could see why it wouldn't hardly ever be applicable.
Right, but agencies have the right to put in whatever they want. Even if it's not required. If you do a $40,000 renovation to some area office space you're leasing, technically you could put those records into the asset system. But I believe the requirement is 100,000. We'll make sure by the end of the day here, make sure that I'm correct on that. And we just have a few more topics here. So fully depreciated assets. We've had questions about that from agencies. Hey, we have some assets that are fully depreciated. Can we retire them? And that answer is no. You cannot retire an item because it's fully depreciated. If an agency has older equipment in their possession, they must continue tracking that asset until the asset is removed. Okay, if you have it and it has a barcode tag on it, it's in the asset system, you cannot retire it just because of the accounting value of the item. Employee / equipment transfers. Okay, so there have been recently, with different laws changing, there are a handful of brand new agencies. Some started in October, and others won't start until July 1st. And there will be employees that will be transferring to the new agencies along with their equipment. The equipment should not be transferred until the equipment is physically moved to the new agency. Okay. So even if an agency, let's say the person is not physically moving, they're still staying at the same location, but they're now going to be an employee of another agency. That equipment cannot be transferred until the employee is transferred and that agency becomes active. Okay. And so there is a new KID, KID01 is the business unit, and there are multiple agencies that are going to be moving people. And I believe they're physically moving, so it won't, but either way, the transfers have to be approved by surplus, and then the transfer form would be sent to us, but we will not be able to physically transfer the items into Oaks until the agency is active, and the person should not, the equipment should not be moved until it's jurisdiction of the new agency. That gets a little hairy, but we've had some questions on that. Michelle, are there any other
Fred,
questions?
So yeah. Josh, he messaged something. He says the cost of the improvement meets the capital asset reporting criteria cost thresholds for its particular asset class, greater than $100,000 for a building improvement with a useful life of at least 2 years. The agency shall then report the asset as a capital leasehold improvement within the building asset class account. And that was from the handbook.
Oh, Josh looked it up for us. Okay.
Yes, he did. Thank you so much, Josh.
So that means I was right? I'm never right.
Yes, you are.
I either know it or I don't. Anyway, so that tells you I've been doing this for 20 years. We don't have that many leasehold improvements, but occasionally it does come up. And so we decided we would go ahead and speak on it. And I should have known that. I should have known. Josh shouldn't have had to look it up for me, but thank you, Josh.
I have another from, it says one of our office location had a leasehold improvement. We are out of that suite. I moved to a different suite with no leasehold improvement costs. How do we remove previous leasehold improvements from our inventory?
Retire by sale. Retire the asset.
Bonnie wants to know, is there a faster way to transfer all of the assets of a custodian other than transferring each item separately?
Yeah, there is, depending on how many records we're talking about. So just reach out to Michelle or I, and we'll deal with you specifically offline. Yeah, there is a way, but it depends on how many assets we're talking about. And yeah, if somebody is the custodian of hundreds of records, then it would be beneficial to do a mass change instead of doing one by one. Definitely.
That's it so far.
Okay. We've gone just a little bit over, and these were really good questions. Again, we had 174 people on this call. We had 215 that actually registered. So that's pretty good attendance. And again, we will get this posted on our website for those folks who weren't able to attend, any of your coworkers that would like to hear this. Michelle, was there any other topics that I needed to go back and double check? I can't recall any.
No.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. And if you have any questions coming up, the biggest thing to know from this entire thing, okay, is not that you have to remember everything in the policy. It's not anything we talked about. The biggest thing is that you guys know you have two people who can help you. Okay. So if you go to your central support and you can't reach them, or they're off that day or whatever, we can help you with policy related state policy interpretation. So please definitely reach out, and if we can't get us right away, we'll get back to you pretty quick. We have a pretty good reputation, not keeping people on hold. With that being said, I would like to thank you again for attending, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good Thanksgiving.